Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today, Best Practices for Dietary Supplements. I'm excited to have Daryl Sullivan and Jeff Stassi here with me hosting the webinar. I am Amy Knock, and I will be moderating today's session. Before we begin, I'll let you know a little bit more how the webinar will run. The webinar is being recorded, and the slides and recording will be available to you within 3 business days. A short Q&A session will follow the presentation today to answer any viewer-submitted questions that you may have. During the webinar, you can submit questions using the webinar sidebar menu. Select the Questions tab, type in your question, then hit the Enter key on your keyboard. Remember, you can submit questions anytime throughout the webinar. That concludes my very brief introduction today. I will now pass it over to you. You may begin the presentation.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Daryl Sullivan. I'm the Chief Science Officer at Eurofins US Food. Very happy to have everyone here today. Jeff and I have a lot of information we want to share with you today. So let's get started and look at what we're going to cover today. So here's our outline, and after we get through introductions, I want to talk about regulatory and industry considerations in dietary supplement testing. There's a strong industry desire right now for harmonizing this testing, and we want to dive into that a little bit. Right now, there's a lot of challenges with integrity of some new products that are on the market, and we want to cover that. We want to give a very strong piece of information on laboratory requirements, how to recognize a quality laboratory, what test method performance requirements look like, what are scientifically valid methods, and then we'll try to bring this together in some conclusions and hopefully answer your questions that come about as we go through our presentation. So the dietary supplement market is booming. Those of you that are involved in it are very well aware of this, I'm sure. So throughout the pandemic, this increase continued and now is continuing as the pandemic is starting to wind down. There's exponential growth that's occurring that's very, very good for business, but it's also created challenges in the supply chain for manufacturers. So whenever there's challenges in the supply chain, we find some products being substituted and some adulteration occurring in the supply chain. That's led to some questionable product quality and some products that have been produced that have really not met the standards that we'd like to see of them. The results of that were some recalls that FDA was involved in and some activities now that are occurring within industry, within retailers that are trying to make us more proactive so that we can get ahead of some of these issues that are occurring. So some of the considerations that regulatory and industry are involved with right now. Due to this questionable product integrity that I mentioned, FDA has reacted and there has been some product recalls. During this exponential growth in business, as you can well expect, there's been some new players that have entered the business. It's a great opportunity. There's a strong need for a lot of products. But with that has come some issues that we're going to go into a little bit further. Above all else, everything we talk about today, manufacturers are still required to comply with the FDA good manufacturing practices. We want to keep that in the back of our minds because nothing has changed there. There's a lot of new things that are being supplemented to that. We want to keep that in the back of our minds. So some retail organizations are now beginning to specify certain testing parameters because they don't believe that the current environment is putting enough safeguards around the products that they have for sale within their organizations. So what does this mean? Some new products have been shown to be adulterated. There's been additional testing being done around this, and there's clearly some products being, some problems being detected. Industry has responded looking for some harmonized practices because the retailers, as I've mentioned, are starting to publish their own requirements. So CVS has requirements. Wegmans has recently published certain requirements for products to be sold within their organization. And the big one that's out there is Amazon. Amazon is promulgating regulations that they want to put in force for anyone that wants to sell products within their domain. So clearly it would be nice to have some harmonization in what these different programs look like so that manufacturers don't have to test to 3 different sets of specifications in trying to get their products out into the marketplace. So let's take a quick poll here and find out what this means to us. Are any of you that are with us today impacted by these new requirements from retailers like Amazon, CVS, and Wegmans? If you can just select an answer here, I'd like to get a quick idea from our audience whether or not this is very important. And I think we'll give about 30 seconds and then we'll see the results and we'll go from there.
All right, and it looks like it is launched, and Daryl, I have that going. Let me close that out here. And then the result of that, so Daryl, if you can't see those, it looks like about 55% said yes, 29% said no, and 16% said not sure.
Okay, so that clearly is telling me that this is making an impact to a lot of people. It certainly has in the testing industry, and something that we want to dive into a little bit further. So Amy, I can't see the presentation right now.
Okay, are you able to see it again right now?
It's no.
Okay, let me.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we're good to go now. So
Okay,
there has
wonderful.
been in this arena, in the desire for harmonization, because clearly these retail requirements are affecting us, there's been a number of scientific and industry associations that are working towards some level of harmonization that could be very beneficial. AOAC International, which many of us are familiar with for their standards and test methods, they've been promulgating standards for 130 years. They have launched a botanical and dietary supplement integrity program. They have partnered with GRMA, the Global Retailer and Manufacturer Alliance, to try to work on harmonizing specifications and then developing standards and test methods in order to comply with that. This is a new effort that could be very significant for us as we move ahead. Another initiative, SSCI, Supplement Safety Compliance Initiative, also being driven by retailers, is very similar to the GFSI, which has been used in the food industry for many years. In addition to those, the American Council of Independent Laboratories has recently begun working on a best practice document for testing dietary supplements. This is a group of independent third-party laboratories that have put their heads together and published a best practice for laboratories testing dietary supplements. This has been reviewed and commented on by FDA, and during a meeting later this week, hopefully we'll begin to finalize this document and it will be available for others to look at as well. NSF International has been helping us for many, many years with manufacturer and laboratory auditing and product certification, and they're certainly available for assistance in harmonization as these efforts move ahead. In addition to these industry and scientific efforts, our government dollars also are in effect in helping with certain activities. NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, has a laboratory quality assurance program for dietary supplement laboratories that helps them develop practices that meet specifications and meet requirements for these very unique products. And they also offer some very, very good matrix reference materials, which can be very helpful to the laboratories. And lastly, the USP, United States Pharmacopoeia, has a number of monographs and reference materials to help us in the laboratory environment. And they also offer their own product certification program, which many companies take advantage of. So let's start to talk about the laboratory expectations. With this massive growth in the sales of dietary supplements, there has been an increased need for testing. with this increased need, there had been a number of new laboratories that have begun testing dietary supplements. Some of them are brand new laboratories. Others were food labs, environmental labs, industrial hygiene labs that are now entering the dietary supplement space. So all of the requirements we're going to talk about now and throughout the rest of this webinar apply to any testing laboratory that's going to test dietary supplements. This includes government laboratories, industry in-house laboratories, and third-party contract laboratories. It's not isolated to one or the other. Beginning our recommendations, we will say that the baseline is accreditation to ISO 17025 requirements. That is the baseline, and that's where we begin. There's a lot of additional expectations that we're going to share with you today, and that begins with understanding the FDA Code of Regulations, Part 111. That's the definition of good manufacturing practices for dietary supplement manufacturers. And while there isn't a specific section in there for laboratory testing, there are a lot of implications in there that the laboratories need to be aware of. One of the most important aspects of Part 111 is the requirement that we use scientifically valid methods. If you haven't worked in the dietary supplement space, this is a new term, and we're going to talk more about it as we move through the rest of our presentation. So in addition to the test methods, the lab must have facilities, equipment, and staff. You would think this is anecdotal, but in fact, it's a very, very important case. With large numbers of testing, you need to make sure you have redundancy in equipment, adequate facilities, and most importantly, the staff needs to have training in dietary supplement testing and the CFR Part 111 requirement. The minimum recommendation, as I mentioned, is ISO 17025, and these test methods must be scientifically valid. Well, what do I mean when they say they must be scientifically valid? The laboratory is expected to be transparent, so scientific validity needs to be demonstrated. So whatever laboratory you're using, whether it's your own in-house lab or an independent third-party laboratory, the question is the method you're using to test my product scientifically valid? And if the answer is yes, there needs to be documentation to support that, and they need to be able to share that documentation with you. In that documentation, you should find a definition around the test methods being fit for the intended purpose of their use. So they need to be fit for purpose. You need to have documentation that these methods are scientifically valid. So let's take another poll question here and get a little more information from our viewers today. When was the last time you audited or assessed the laboratory that you're working with? And again, this will include your in-house lab as well as a third-party independent laboratory. If you can go ahead and select your answer, we'll give about 30 seconds, and then Amy will move us forward.
All right, I'm just giving it a few more moments here to see where everybody comes in with their responses. All right, so this was interesting findings here. So 37% said this year, 19% said last year, 16% said within 2 to 4 years ago, 3% 5 or more, and 25% said they have not done this yet.
Okay, so that 25% is a bit concerning, and we want to look into that a little bit further. One of the things that Jeff is going to talk about in the remaining part of the presentation is how you qualify a laboratory. How do you select a quality testing laboratory? And auditing is clearly a part of that. Now, during the pandemic with travel restrictions, auditing was very challenging, but it's something we need to take seriously and something we need to think about as we move forward.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeff Stassi. I'm the analytical service manager. Work with Daryl quite a bit on a lot of these initiatives as well. So Daryl just provided a nice overview of some of the harmonization efforts and other tactical things that are happening in the industry. And I wanted to take this a little bit further to talk a little bit about the laboratory environment, how to choose a proper laboratory, and then get into some of the method validation parameters. So first things first, we'll talk about how to choose the right lab partner. And again, we choose this partner term, and we use that very, succinctly. When we talk about partners, you should use your laboratory and consider them a partner in your business. So if you have the right lab partners, you're going to have a collaborative initiative. They're going to be able to help you through a lot of the scientific and regulatory affairs that are happening in the industry, not just a testing facility, but also a consultant on those lines. So first things first, make sure your lab has the expertise on the core products. There's a lot of laboratories out there that test products, but the dietary supplement space is pretty complicated. There's a lot of complex products, complex ingredients. So of course you want to make sure that your laboratory has extensive experience and working knowledge of the products that we're going to be testing. Conduct a technical assessment. This really has to do with the methodologies, the science that's pitted around the methods. So again, Daryl used the term scientifically valid methods, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But certainly you want to make sure that the laboratories you're using have scientifically valid methods. They've documented ways to demonstrate that. And it's very important for the regulatory requirement and the regulatory environment that they're working under. And again, does your lab have validation data to support the methods they use? And again, some people may gloss that over. It's very important to understand that they have the proper documentation to support things that they're doing. How to choose the right lab partners. This really has to do with determining, again, what the proper labs you're going to be using are, how they operate. Determine that the lab has appropriate quality systems. It's not just about the science. It's not just about technical expertise, but do they have the quality systems to back that? Again, Daryl mentioned a couple slides, ISO 17025. ISO 17025, again, from a harmonization standpoint, that really has a lot to do with, setting a minimum quality standard for the quality of the testing that you're doing. Every lab who has ISO accreditations has a scope involved. So how many methods do they have? Do they have, are they covering a lot of the methods that you're interested in? Some labs may have a couple things and then, that's about it. You want to make sure the scope of the quality systems and the test methods that they have, cover most of what you're trying to accomplish within your testing program. And again, major SOPs, are they documented? That's what ISO 17025 really forces you to provide the proper documentation, the proper accreditations and things like that, so you have the confidence in those systems. And last but not least, I think the last poll question kind of touched on this a bit. Conduct proper audits. There is ways for you to do this. There's a pre-screening audit, questionnaires. We certainly, laboratories should be very forthright about how they test things, what systems they have in place. So at the very least, that should be step one in this journey into trying to screen the laboratories that you're going to use. So make sure you have that in place. And then we always recommend an on-site audit. Come in internal. Laboratory should be very happy to show you the what they're doing, what systems they have in place, the equipment, the people. So an on-site audit is always a great second step to evaluate that they can provide the services that you're looking for. Good qualities in a lab provider, and again, some of this is a little bit obvious in certain cases. There's a lot about use of proper methodologies and quality systems, but also make sure that you're evaluating the customer service piece of this as well. I believe that's a very important part of the puzzle for the success and the satisfaction of working with a laboratory, to make sure that the customer service is at the forefront. Laboratories should also participate in proficiency programs, always constantly testing to make sure that they provide accurate, precise results for the test methods that they're using. And again, a good laboratory provider, I believe, is involved in industry associations. They keep themselves out front of the science of what's going on, keep involved in the regulatory affairs and on top of the, the regulatory environment that's going on, so they consult their clients and their customers wisely, and so they can use the resources they have to the best of their advantage. Always be willing to troubleshoot issues out of spec situations. All laboratories are going to run across out of spec issues where they're going to have to troubleshoot things. A good laboratory will be very transparent in that, be very active in trying to come up with a solution to the test programs that you have. So I would certainly be open, make sure that your laboratories are open to doing that as well. Be very transparent about not hiding information, keep open. If you have to share techniques, methodologies, things like that, that certainly is not out of the question. Should be able to be very transparent with that type of information. And again, also should have proper ISO accreditation as you look at what a good quality lab may have. And again, what is ISO 17025? I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this. ISO 17025 provides general requirements for the competence of testing and calibration laboratories. So it's very specific to the analytical methods that are out there for the products that we're testing. In this case, we're talking to the dietary supplement folks in a lot of cases here, certainly food testing as well, but make sure that the ISO accreditation provides general requirements for the competence of that. It assures that procedures are documented, drives the records of training and competence, creates standards of quality for test methods. So really, if you have accreditation to ISO 17025, it does provide confidence to the customers that there is at least that minimum amount of competence that is happening around the test cycle for the products that we're evaluating. And last but not least, it ensures compliance by continuously monitoring that we're producing accurate results through proficiency programs and other types of quality controls that happen through the laboratory. Test method requirements. This really comes to the definition of what is a scientifically valid method. And again, Daryl positioned this: a fit for purpose method is a method that is specific for its intended use. It continually does what it's intended to do. And really the core definition, that's kind of been out there in industry for a few years now, is a method that's accurate, precise, and specific for its intended use. So these 4 bullet points are really the core of what is a scientifically valid method. And it looks like we have another poll question coming up here. Let's see if I can read this. I'm gonna have to scooch over here. Question is, have you needed method validation or verification work for any of your products? Again, we'll give you about 30 seconds to respond to that, and we'll see how that plays out. And what do we have, Amy? What are we seeing?
Yeah, so the results here are 35% say yes often, 49% say yes sometimes, and 17% are saying not yet.
Well, that's really interesting. Of course, we always recommend, you understand the validation parameters to make sure that we have, you have the proper confidence in the test methods that you're using. So, anytime that we see, a customer saying to us, do you have validation? Perhaps, it's something that there isn't a validation on, that they might have to embark upon their own individual product specific validations. We certainly are. I feel like a laboratory should be open to doing that and discussing what you need for those types of programs. Hopefully they can see my screen here as we transition over.
Yep, it's looking good.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about now method validation and verification. In this slide, I kind of pinpointed a few different types of methodologies that you may run across in laboratories where, you know, a lot of laboratories will use compendial methods, AOAC methods, USP methods, you know, other documented compendials that are out there. And these methods are generally fully validated, fit for purpose methods. So they have been, you know, in a lot of cases collaborated. They've already been validated. So really the obligation of the laboratory in this case that you're using is to ensure the suitability of the method under actual conditions of use. So there's really not a need for more formal validation, but really the obligation is for that laboratory to make sure that they can function the method accurately under their equipment, with their people, and you know the day-to-day operations that they have. So that is really the what you would have to do to test a compendial method. Other types of methods, there are compendial methods that are meant to test other matrices. You may extend a method from, let's say, infant formula method to a dietary supplement, which happens in certain cases, which we would call a matrix extension. And under those conditions, certainly you would have to, look at accuracy, precision, and specificity at the very least, kind of coming from the definition of scientifically valid method to make sure that, those matrices under that test method, even though it was perhaps meant for some other type of matrix, that it will function accurately and precisely in the matrix that it is being extended to. So those types of programs, laboratories should be able to, to help you and to evaluate those types of products that may not completely align with the intent of the method. And then there's, those in-house developed methods where there may not be a compendial method out there. Laboratories may take it upon themselves to develop their own methods, to use their own technologies, to advance some of the methods that might have been out there that may be a little bit older and just decide to develop their own methodologies. This may require more comprehensive validation. Certainly, there may be additional requirements like extraction efficiencies and certain things that you might work through in the development phase to then validate the method that it functions properly. So, demonstrating, in a written protocol, in a written way that those methods function properly is also something the laboratory should be doing. Typical analytical characteristics for validation. Again, these terms have been out there a long time, but certainly method validation as a big bucket revolves around a lot of these exterior parameters: accuracy, precision, how close to the true value are, can you measure the compounds, precision and repeatability, reproducibility, how well, how variable is the method essentially? Can you, provide a tight enough method with the precision, that is deemed necessary to have a good solid methodology? Linearity, range, robustness. Robustness revolves around making slight intentional modifications to some of the parameters like the mobile phase or the column temperature. You may adjust those slightly just to see if that has any effect on how the method performs. So certainly when you're looking at validating a method, you would look at all of these parameters and determine, which ones are appropriate to use and which ones aren't. And certainly, take all those into consideration when you're looking to do method validation. This slide comes really out of the USP. Again, Daryl mentioned USP earlier. USP is a great reference for dietary supplement products, certainly, also pharmaceutical products, but in the dietary supplement space, we do use USP often as a reference, especially even as a method of choice as well. But I like this little table that they put on here. This really comes to the point of, determining what analytical characteristics are pertinent for different types of product categories. So category one is a major component. You're testing a vitamin C capsule, for instance. vitamin C being the major component, you can see that, most all of those parameters would be held in the validation scheme. As you move on to, other types of methods, impurity methods, quantitative assays, limit tests, you may have a little bit different parameters you may look for. And as you get down the list to category 3s and category 4 products, they get a little bit different. It gets a little more challenged to use accuracy, for instance, as a test parameter. So certainly this is a great table. USP 1225, didn't list that on this slide, but USP 1225 is a nice resource that talks about validation of compendial procedures. So if you want to look that up, you'll get some great information on all these terms and kind of how they suggest that these be used. And then AOAC has what I would consider a really nice document that they put out there. They publish as a standard method called Standard Method Performance Requirements. And what I would say in this case is, these are official, documents. They describe minimum recommended performance characteristics to be used during the evaluation. So it's a really nice laid out document that they have. There is I believe a folic acid one that's in draft form you can find out there. That is, will kind of show you the format of how this is. You can certainly Google a lot of different SMPRs out on the internet and find how they're structured. But, the SMPRs really come down to defining the performance of the methodology. So when you're going to set this method up in your laboratory, it is already evaluated what the expectations are for the method, the RSD, the accuracy, the precision. All these parameters have already been defined, and they've been defined by stakeholders in the industry, folks that are from academia, laboratories, regulatory agencies, all collaborate on this to make sure that SMPR, that standard method performance requirement, is appropriate for the test and the product that it's being designed to be used on. And again, these are not necessarily regulatory requirements, but we would recommend, looking at those for any type of validations that you're looking for, you're looking to do, and they're just great references out there. And again, the format that they use for this, won't go into a whole lot of detail here, but they have an intended use of the method little section there. So, it's very important to have that documented. What is the intended use of the methodology? How does it apply? What's the scope of the method? Talks about the analytical technique, if it's HPLC, if it's GC, mass spec. It outlines the analytical techniques used. It defines any terms that are going to be used in the validation of the method. So if you're using precision, accuracy, specificity, it really has a clearly laid out set of parameters that you would use for that methodology. And then, of course, real important is the method performance requirements. And again, I think this separates itself really well from maybe some of the other validation resources that are out there. It really defines the performance of the methodology. So when you set it up in your laboratory, you already know what you have to achieve to meet these requirements. And of course, some other, ancillary things down there, the test materials, references, those types of things. So again, SMPR, a very nice format to use for method validation. And in the last couple slides, Daryl, feel free to chime in on any of this. I wanted to look ahead as to in the industry. Daryl did a nice job of spelling out, the harmonization efforts that are going on. I think we've all kind of working in the industry for a long time, understand that, there's a lot of different methods out there. There's a lot of different approaches, different laboratories, different scientific ways to do things. But certainly there is a desire to harmonize, just so, we're not always trying to decide, what's the best approach, trying to make at least get harmonized on the dietary supplement side of things. So so we can, have a very minimum baseline, make sure we are doing the right things for the industry.
And if
And
I
again,
might,
yep, go ahead, Daryl.
I was just going to say, as Jeff just mentioned here, this harmonization effort is real and it's moving forward. Earlier in the presentation, we shared with you a number of scientific organizations that are working on this process. All of those organizations are looking for volunteers, like many of you who are with us today. If you're interested in this activity, if you want to learn more, or if you want to participate, Jeff's going to share with some resources with you in just a moment of where you can get more information. But we would highly encourage you to become involved in this activity because it's going to continue to grow and continue to be more and more important as we move forward.
Thanks, Daryl. Great comments. Also looking ahead, obviously with, Amazon and the other retailers Daryl had mentioned, certainly those retailers are driving a lot of activity in the industry, especially, some of the folks selling on those sites, maybe haven't had to look at testing, as closely as they do now. So, a lot of this is being driven by the requirements of the retailer. So, we're obviously able to help, assist with some of those requirements, make sure that, the methodologies align and those types of things. And again, the laboratories will need to expand to meet all the demands of the industry these days. So, last but not least, conclusions, key takeaways. Again, there is a very high demand for these services. I would definitely, make sure you're choosing the right lab partners. This is key to really the success of working through, some of these, especially with retailers, FDA requirements, those types of things. We really need to choose the right lab partner so you're using the proper methods, consult with you the right ways, making sure you're spending your money in the appropriate way. Those are very important factors in success of testing dietary supplements. And Daryl had mentioned a bit about resources. I'm just going to leave this on the screen for a moment and you'll get the slides. I believe these are links to some of the things Daryl had mentioned. So again, we encourage you to get involved in the industry, look at some of the goings on that are happening in these industries and these associations. There's working groups out there that are always looking for volunteers. So get involved, if you choose to. And these are some of the resources we wanted to provide. And I think that concludes our webinar. We thank you for looking that over. Amy, do you have any final thoughts on this or close this out?
Yeah, I guess what I'd like to do is just pause right here again to open up the poll just to see if you would like someone from Eurofins to follow up with you. So we know that obviously, there might be different needs right now. If you would like someone to contact you immediately, or in the near future, just select the button that's most applicable to your needs, and we will certainly follow up with you, at that point in time. I'd like to move it into a brief question and answer session here. We have gotten a lot of questions that have come into the chat, which is great. So if we don't have time to answer all of these today, please know that we will follow up with you. We have all of your contact information. So if we don't get to them, we certainly will follow up. But the first one is really around OOS results. So what is Eurofins' policy regarding OOS results? Does Eurofins do an internal investigation to ensure there were no errors in how the test was performed?
Absolutely. Any well-run laboratory will have a very defined process for handling out-of-spec situations, and of course, we always, you'll run into out-of-spec situations in the testing process. So yeah, we absolutely have a formalized process. And again, I feel like as well, other than that, we also will customize out-of-spec programs for the particular customer and what their needs are. So it really depends on the situation. But of course, we have a fully documented investigation practice that we do, draw conclusions, come to, whether we have to do additional retesting. And again, it may kind of transition into, troubleshooting, other types of situations that you may have to use. And, sometimes the laboratories do things wrong. Sometimes we make mistakes. So there are things that go on within the investigation to try to pinpoint whether it was an analytical issue, whether it's a product issue, or something else. But certainly all good laboratories should have a way to approach out of spec scenarios.
Thank you for that. The next one came in. What are the typical acceptance criteria used for accuracy and precision for the testing of assays and dietary supplements?
If I could answer that, Jeff, real quick. So it varies a great deal on the analyte and the matrix. And one of the things that Jeff described in the AOAC process was the standard method performance requirements. That's where those items are detailed. So for example, an ingredient that is a very pure product may have specifications that say your accuracy needs to be between 95 and 105%. But a natural product, something that has an active ingredient that's coming from a plant material, we may be comfortable with something more like 85 to 115%. So it varies a great deal on what you're going to be measuring and what the intended use is. And having those definitions clearly specified makes the approach very, very well specified as you look for different test methods. I don't know if you want to do that, but. And could you move to the next slide so they can see our contact information, Jeff?
Yes, thank you, Daryl. Great. And then, wonderful. And then, is it a requirement to test glyphosate in botanicals or just pesticides in general? If required, what's the limit?
I think we may have to take that one offline,
Okay.
honestly. So that's a pretty specific question to some of the contaminant side. So if you don't mind, we'll take that offline and respond. Assume we have the contact.
Yes, we have all the contact details. Sounds great there. I know that's very specific.
Depends on the matrix, Jeff. So we'll get back with some details because it's quite specific, actually.
Wonderful. And I think we have time for one more question here. So of the 8 characteristics outlined for a method validation, which ones do Eurofins require for a method to be scientifically valid?
What we would determine as scientifically valid is, precision, accuracy, and specificity are the 3 minimum requirements. Certainly depending upon the methodology and some of the other, factors that may be involved, you may add in some other things. But certainly, when we look at a scientifically valid method, we look at accuracy and precision as 2 of the major components. Making sure that the method is accurate enough to, and has a good, a low variability, low enough to be considered a solid, good performing method. And of course, specificity comes into play. You want to only measure the compound of interest. You don't want to, add in other, interferences, things like that. So certainly those are a few of the things that we would utilize to determine a scientifically valid method.
Great, thank you. And I know, just to wrap it up here, a couple of housekeeping items. So we have received a lot of questions regarding a copy of the presentation. So yes, that will definitely be sent out to you within 3 business days. The recording, a copy of the presentation, as well as the link where you can find that on our website. But certainly we've received some other comments and very specific questions. So what we will do is we will compile that information and have one of our Eurofins reps get back to you shortly. And with that, I want to thank you, Daryl and Jeff, for the presentation today. And thank you so much to everyone for attending.